Police have a backlog of over 85,000 clearance certificates and firearm licenses. This is despite the implementation of a new automated fingerprint identification system. From January to March 2022, the police received over 75,440 applications for police clearance certificates. They finalized 32,045, leaving a backlog of 43,395. Well, let's discuss this further then with Stephen Palos of the South African Gun Owners Association, giving credit to the initial reporting on that story of News 24, as well as what came out of Parliament from a question asked by the DA's Andrew Whitfield. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Palos, this evening. So it seems then that the problems revolve around what is known as the automated fingerprint identification system. What seems to have changed that is leading to these backlogs?
Good evening, Tulasizwe and your viewers. Thank you for this opportunity. Just a quick correction, I'm not with the South African Gun Owners Association, SAGA. I'm with the Confederation of Hunting Associations of South Africa, CHASA.
Sure.
That's the function I'm representing all my constituents, but we work together with a number of other firearm advocacy-related organizations in the space on an ongoing basis for many, many years. The question at hand at the moment is, if you quote those figures, what you're really talking about there is not a one-off figure. That's actually kind of recurring numbers. That's almost a constant scenario. They're always in a backlog scenario and have been for many, many years. The subject of efficiency within the administrative function of the police, particularly within the firearms control center function, has been a matter that has been under scrutiny for well over a decade, in fact, nearly 2 decades since the introduction of the current legislation. It's been a matter which is almost an ongoing agenda item within the Portfolio Committee for Police at Parliament, the so-called reviewing and reconstructing of the firearms control system. But what you're speaking to here really is in actual fact a deeper problem, which is the fingerprint checking system, which goes far wider than just firearm licenses. It's for a lot of different functions for police clearances that are required in the commercial space, in general crime, and I would imagine it also has an impact even on criminal investigations because it must all interrelate. So it just shows a complete breakdown of administrative function within SAPS. And we, of course, as firearm owners are at the rock face of it because we are constantly clients to the system that is constantly in a state of ongoing failure, regardless of the fact that they are forever renewing and relooking and repurchasing systems, etc.
Sure.
But I think every man in the street, not just the firearm owner, needs to be highly concerned about this, because this is why we have no progress in criminal proceedings, in court cases. This is why we have the crime on the street, is this dysfunctionality that continues.
Yeah.
We try our best with, we try and speak to the police, but they are closed door at the moment. Portfolio Committee is pretty good. The Civilian Secretariat of Police were good. They started to not listen so much. Eventually, the Portfolio Committee told them to come back to stakeholders and engage with us, and that process has just restarted, thankfully. And we'll see if this leads to some progress.
Sure. So if you're saying that this is a recurring problem, does it appear to be getting worse over time? Because, you mentioned the word backlog, but, the insistence has been by the police that there isn't, at least in previous years, that they didn't have a backlog. They just didn't meet the targets that they had set for themselves to finalize these clearance applications within 15 days. They didn't meet the targets, but that did not necessarily translate to a backlog as such. So when we're talking about the figures that we're talking about now, a backlog of 85,000 combined between police clearance certificates and firearm license applications, does this paint a picture where the problem you're saying is recurrent is actually getting worse?
It actually goes in fits and starts. They have pockets of excellence, and there are pockets of excellence within the service providers, within the SAPs as well, make no mistake. But they have times when they start to catch up with things, but they never really seem to get to, let's say, being level pegging. So their terminology they use there, which is to say that they don't meet their own targets. Well, surely the correct target for any business is to meet the target of what the demand presents on any given day. So their target is to meet the demand of the client base, the greater public out there. And if they're not meeting that target, they're running backlogs on an ongoing basis. So it's semantics. The reality of the matter is that they are simply not good administrators, and they do not seem to be amenable to discussions on ways to improve their administration. And that is a thing that I think the citizens of this country need to concern themselves with, is why are they so reluctant to take advice, to take assistance that is offered to them, to take the hands that we stretch out on an ongoing basis to solve the various problems. And in actual fact, the worst is they compound it themselves. I'll give you an example for the firearms legislation proposes from the beginning that a system of competency is the route to firearm ownership. You get a competency certificate issued by the police. They oversee that, which includes your background checks and your personality and your criminal record, etc. That is the place at which these types of clearances apply. They should not need to redo that again for every single firearm license you apply for. Once you are carrying a valid competency certificate that has a certain lifespan and then it expires, 5 years or 10-year lifespans, depending on the class of firearm ownership you have. But they will do a background check on every single application you make, notwithstanding the fact that maybe last year or the year before, you managed to achieve a new competency certificate. Yeah. So they're repeating, and this is not required in the legislation, but they're channeling all of this through the system. So they will not accept the fact that the legislation doesn't require that. So they're actually bogging down their own service for other purposes with this ongoing firearm applications. Because remember, you also have to renew your firearm license from time to time. But that doesn't mean that you have to then do a background check for the firearm renewal. You can do it for the competency renewal, which is one-off per individual. But as a gun owner myself, who has a number of hunting firearms, etc., I'm doing renewals of firearms every few years. And every time they want fingerprints again. Why did they not accept the fact that I'm still sitting with a valid competency certificate, at which point I was cleared? But they still want to run it all through the system another time and another time and another time. So they bog themselves down with this unnecessary and not legislated requirement.
So lastly then, Mr. Paulus, I'm just wondering, what is the impact of this in terms of compliance, in terms of people, that are prospective firearm owners wanting to go through the whole competency process, as well as getting that police clearance and everything, all the prerequisites, and do things by the book? Is there a likelihood that this frustration could be driving people to illicit firearm ownership?
Well, I could imagine that could be occurring in areas where there's a desperation for self-defense and no other means. And, I'm not an expert in what might be happening in areas with particularly high crime situations, such as the pockets of gangster-ridden environments, etc., where maybe people have to resort to any means whatsoever. It's not my area of expertise, but I know enough anecdotally to suppose that is a likely outcome there. But more concerning for me is that it's hindering every part of the crime prevention and crime investigation and prosecution side, because the whole system gets backed up. So, and there's a cost factor too, because business and industry rely on these clearance certificates. You need clearance certificates for a multitude of industry. You also need clearance certificates so that dealers can sell their firearms. It doesn't help that a dealer sells a firearm this year, but it takes 2 years before he can actually get the funds in and get that firearm out of his safe. So there's multiple complexities that this creates. It's a very unnecessary situation, and it can be fixed quite easily if they engage with us proactively. We are there, and many of fellow stakeholders are there to assist with means to make this better.
Yeah. All right. I've got to thank you for your time, Mr. Stephen Palos. And I also appreciate you amplifying the impact that it's beyond the prospective and current firearm owners. And you are absolutely right. The police clearance is a requirement in many, many sectors, including if you are getting employed, for instance, in the public sector and, as you say, in the private sector as well, but also other applications. I can imagine here we've been talking about the issue of migration, immigrants wanting to regularize their stay through the correct papers. They require clearance certificates. And so if we have a backlog there, we have serious problems. That's Stephen Palos there of the Confederation of Hunting Associations of South Africa. So it would seem there's actually a bigger conversation to be had around this one. Let's see if we can take it forward in the coming days and weeks.